Tim Tebow is certainly no stranger to most of us. If you are not a sports fan, you certainly have heard of Tim Tebow. He's the quarterback of the Denver Broncos. But for a very young man, he has had a big, big impact in the world already. He's just released in the last 10 months or so an autobiography called Through My Eyes. He is the author. And Nathan Whitaker wrote it with him, and Nathan is with us. It's a New York Times bestseller. You must be feeling pretty pleased about its success.
Well, it's been great. It's a reflection of Tim and all the hard work he's put in and all the time that he's spent kind of trying to reflect what God has done in his life. So
now, Nathan, when you first came up with this idea, was it your idea or was it his to co-author this book with him?
It was his idea.
His idea. And why did he contact you?
Well, I had done books before with some other sports figures, and then also growing up and now living again in the shadow of the University of Florida, I knew a bunch of folks that Tim knew, and so that we got connected that way.
You have written a book, a couple books, haven't you? Or one or two books with Tony Dungy?
Right.
Now, was he aware of that?
Yes, his parents said Tony and I have done 4 together, and Tim's given those out. His parents have given those out as Christmas gifts before, as I understand it. So.
Okay. So you were a known entity to him, at least in terms of your writing ability.
Right.
Have you been shocked or amazed or surprised or taken aback by the phenomenon that is Tim Tebow? I mean, he is the most talked about, most high-profile athlete maybe in American history, and I mean, it just seems like it's happened overnight.
It's absolutely breathtaking, and the way this past season unfolded for him, with things happening that have never happened in NFL history, and then him becoming such a household name, is I'm pleased for him, and I'm glad that it's such a positive role model. But it's been unbelievable to watch.
How many years ago did you begin this process of writing this autobiography?
We began it in the fall of 2010.
So he had already been drafted by the Broncos at that point?
He had been drafted, and we started meeting together in Denver on his off days when he didn't need to go to practice.
So would you fly there to meet him, or how'd you connect?
Yes, I would fly out on Monday afternoons, and their off days in the NFL is Tuesday. The players don't have to work that day, so we'd spend all day Tuesday together, and I'd come back on Wednesday morning. And
he would just tell you his story, and you would record it, and then later transcribe it?
Yes. The one thing I found with Tim is that he's used to doing so many interviews, and he's so careful with what he says, and he knows exactly kind of the things he wants to go through, that when I would ask him questions, he would kind of go back into the story that he was used to giving. So I found the more that I could ask things out of order, the more we could just chat, the more that we had unguarded time. It made for a much more tedious process on the back end because everything was completely out of order. But it also gave some depth. And one of the interesting things with Tim is that he doesn't like to talk about himself. His parents raised him on the proverb, let another man praise you. So it's hard for him to get into some of those stories where he's going to the hospital, doing other things. And in fact, he had me pull a number of those out of the book because he said that he didn't do that so that they could be in print. He did that because that was the right thing to do.
What did you think of him, getting to know him as you did?
I really liked him, and you always hope that's going to be the case as you get to know somebody who's like that in the public eye. Very down to earth, very kind, very sensitive. He's always the one who looks kind of in the group to make sure that nobody feels left out and make sure that he includes them, and he's always taken that upon himself to be that person, I understand.
Now in the book he says that he doesn't take accolades too seriously, but criticism really cuts him to the bone, as he put it. He must have had a lot of cuts to the bone over the last few months when so many, at least, of the sports pundit fraternity were saying that he was either underdeveloped or incapable of being a long-term NFL quarterback. They talked about his inability to pass. They talked about his one-dimensional play. They talked about what John Elway wasn't saying between the lines. John Elway, who is the general manager of the Broncos. How did this impact him?
Well, you know, one of the things I've learned from Tim is that he takes constructive criticism to heart, in that if there's something he needs to do to get better, he will do that. Other criticism, however, and there were so many voices talking this year that I have a feeling that he didn't even hear half of it. Other criticism he has learned to let roll off his back. So I know, knowing Tim, and we did not talk about it specifically during the season this year, but the way he responds to that is to is to work harder at the things he can control, the things that are valid.
I was impressed with his maturity. Do you think that being a protege, as he was, I mean, he was special from an early age. Does that kind of ramp up your maturation process? Actually, when I ask that question, I think of so many NFL players who are anything but mature, you know, who are abusing drugs and women and themselves and kind of flame out before they're even 30. But what is about his growth curve? Does it relate to his upbringing?
I think it relates very much to his upbringing, partly the strong, close-knit family that he's a part of. Also the experiences they had in the Philippines, where he saw firsthand that, hey, all that I'm blessed with is not the reality for most of the people on the planet, and realizing early on to not take that for granted. The other thing that part of his upbringing, his parents were very intentional about the lessons they taught and also the people that he was with. And we talked in the book about he could have sleepovers, do whatever, but the parents wanted them to be at their house so that they knew the influences coming in the house. The other thing is that they reached out to others like Danny Werfel, the former Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at the University of Florida, whose dad was a pastor who's now in inner city ministry. And Danny is several years older than Tim. And so when Tim was becoming this protege in high school, his parents connected Danny and Tim. And Danny was gracious enough to hang out with Tim. And so Tim saw a great role model there firsthand who was handling all this success in a very positive way, turning the attention back to the Lord and all the blessings he had. And I think that made a big difference in how Tim matured and dealt with this.
I was really impressed in reading the book at how much ownership, if you will, his parents took in his career. I mean, to the point at one point of even not just changing schools, but changing the location of where they lived in order to qualify to play for another school. And his father, in many ways, being not only a dad and a mentor, but also a kind of a coach, spending hours and hours and hours with him, throwing a baseball because he's very gifted in baseball, giving him input as to his strengths and weaknesses in football, and doing everything it could to pave the way for him. And this from a missionary family. And it says, help me with this. Is this a quirk of the Tebow family, or is this the American way? I mean, really, the promotion of their son and the sustainability or the sustained focus on his career amazes me.